Let's go! Derek Stingley Jr., number 7 for 2021. It's well deserved. Can Derek lead us to the college football playoff? So obviously, there's so much to discuss. We'll get into the brief history of the number 7 uniform, but look, this is another one of those breaking news types of videos. So look, you see Derek Stingley in this number 7 uniform. It looks good on him, and man, it's just great. We've seen some different photos of him working out in the offseason. It seems as if he's locked in, and I understand you don't want to take too much away from a spring game performance, but he looked fully healthy, and there was only one pass where he gave up, and that was to Kayshon Boutte. I mean, this dude looks as if he is ready to go next season, and it's actually this last photo right here. Boom! That DBU tattoo just pops off. Okay, now, if I had a close-up of this number 7 uniform, I would think this was Tyrann Mathieu. Hopefully Derek Stingley can have that type of performance next season. But here's what's fascinating, is this was Derek Stingley back in 2018, okay? And this is him trying out the number 7 uniform. And look, this was a sign of things to come. It's pretty crazy that all of this actually came to fruition. And obviously, you know, he just looks right in it. And Brody Miller included this. There were some people that wanted Sting to get that number 7 as a true freshman. But then again, of course, that number went to Grant Delpit, and well-deserved, because Grant Delpit ended up winning the Thorpe Award. Now, before we get into what this actually means, for those that are just new to this, the number 7 is a tradition in the modern era that was started by Patrick Peterson. And then because Patrick Peterson, because he's one of the greatest SEC football players of all time, it just passed on to the next elite player. So next was Tyrann Mathieu in 2011. He didn't play, of course, in 2012, and then we had to wait 2014, 2015, which, of course, that number 7 went to Leonard Fournette, and 2016. Then in 2017, that number went to DJ Chark as a junior. Then in 2018, that number was, who was it? I'm just going off the top of my head here. Oh, yes. 2018 disaster of Jonathan Giles getting the number 7 uniform. How could you forget that? Still to this day, one of the worst things Ed Orgeron has ever done was giving that guy that jersey number. Then, of course, 2019, Grant Delpit. 2020, it was initially Jamar Chase, and then it ended up being Jacoby Stevens. And then, of course, now in 2021, we have Derek Stingley. Now, of course, modern era 7s, there's more than just those two. Allie Highsmith in 2007, and then you want to go all the way back to Burt Jones. So, you know, it's a historic number. Look, a lot of teams have good number 7s. It's a single-digit number. But still, it is a big deal to LSU fans. Now, this is where things get pretty fascinating. So just today, Derek Stingley Jr. was listed as the number 1 player in the Southeastern Conference for 2021. Very interesting here from 247 Sports. You know what? I'm fine with it, going by what Derek Stingley Jr. did in 2019. Now, there is one big thing that Derek Stingley must hurdle, and that is, of course, playing well against Alabama. Now, he's not the first number 7 that has struggled against Alabama. Leonard Fournette could not ever crack Alabama either. And look, they're a tough team. And Derek Stingley Jr. had a rough game against him in 2019, going up against Devonta Smith. And the same thing kind of true in 2020, albeit that, of course, he was pretty banged up, which leads us to what should we expect from Derek Stingley Jr. this season. A lot. When Derek Stingley Jr. was actually on the field, he was fine overall. Had kind of a rough go at it versus Seth Williams this season. He did force a fumble against Seth Williams before he got into the end zone. But one big thing for Sting is he's got to step it up in the communication and the leadership department. One thing that LSU really struggled with last season was when Derek Stingley would and Cordell Flott would get picked on because they would run certain routes that would force them to run into each other. And I've spoken actually to former NFL defensive backs about this, and they told me that this is purely a communication thing and a chemistry thing. And, you got to fix these things. Some of that's on the coaching, some of that's on Corey Raymond and Bo Pelini, but overall, especially considering Sting and Flott are pretty close, that has to be fixed because so many teams picked on it. Alabama picked on it. Arkansas picked on it. Auburn picked on it. So that's obviously got to get fixed. Now, full disclosure, we've done a lot of defensive back content, including an Elias Ricks film study on a pick six he had against Florida. So this is just a preview of what's to come. So obviously subscribe to the channel if this is your first time ever watching us. Now, while those things need to get fixed on the field, off the field as well, we need to hope Derek Stingley can stay healthy. And what's interesting about it is in 2020, a lot of his injuries were different in that it wasn't just one nagging injury week after week. So before the Mississippi State game, Derek Stingley Jr. was mysteriously hospitalized the night before the game. So less than 24 hours before kickoff, Derek Stingley Jr. was not healthy. He was scratched. Elias Ricks, that was his first ever game, so we were really bare bones. And as many of you know, because we wouldn't switch to zone coverage, we gave up 623 yards passing to a Mississippi State team that turned out to not be that good at all. Then, after that, you had different injuries pop up. He had a dominant performance against Vanderbilt, but against Missouri, he stepped on the yard marker, and it caused him to be hobbled the rest of the game. And I think that injury kind of stuck with him the rest of the season, because then against Arkansas, got banged up, but in a different way. He had a concussion. I think that was it against Arkansas, which really hurt because Eli Ricks was ejected for targeting early in that one. Arkansas was 5 of 5 in passes of 20 yards or more in that game. They averaged 12 yards per pass in that game, and quite frankly, if we didn't dominate time and possession, we likely would not have won that game. So Stingley's absence was huge there. Now, we were lucky, of course, to win the last two games against Florida and Ole Miss, but that doesn't mean Derek Stingley was not sorely missed in those games because both of those teams lit us up, and that was when both of those teams did not have Kyle Pitts, and Ole Miss was without their best tight end, and, of course, Elijah Moore. So you saw last season, when he wasn't fully healthy, we just weren't that good. And even with them on the field, our defensive communication was bad. And once again, I won't get too deep into that because we are getting ready to start a live stream, but we do have a lot more deeper discussions as far as coverage is concerned going into next season. So yes, Derek Stingley, he deserves this number 7. You see his coverage grades throughout this video. He's absolutely insane. You look at all these mock drafts, there's so many that have him in the top 10 already for next year, which would give LSU another top 10 pick. So yeah, the hype is there, but we do need a bounce back. We need the 2019 Sting if we're going to make a run to the college football playoff. Now, there is one more thing. And look, a lot of this comes down to communication in the secondary. We're going to need it from Sting because, we just need him to be a better leader back there. And look, the one thing about those number 7s that we listed, a lot of those guys were great leaders. You heard this about Tyrann Mathieu. You heard this about Patrick Peterson, how great they were as leaders. And Durante Jones is new. This is his first year ever being a defensive coordinator at the Division I Power 5 level. And I think if Sting steps up and says, look, I got you, I think that will go a long way for this team. Boom, I hope you enjoyed this video today, and boom, boom, you see two videos here. One is a defensive depth chart, and the other is the Eli Ricks film study. It is Power Hour LSU. Boom! Lobster raft tonight, let's go!